Hello, world. This is the Know Your Place podcast, and we are on episode 49, almost a half century of these. On this week's episode, I want to talk about what makes a place a desirable place to live and how that varies throughout different areas based on my experiences with talking to different people. So, anyway, we'll get into it. We'll sort of talk about different places in America, and then I'm going to open it up to talk a little about my experiences with Canadian and British people and Australian people. So, Australian slash New Zealanders. Although there is a difference between Australia and New Zealand. Just so I don't get hate mail. Anyway, all right. So I'll get right into it here. So I think largely, and I sort of touched upon this in different episodes of my podcast with people from foreign countries, but largely in America, I bring this up because I've just bought a house, of course, and I like it very much. But I thought I would touch upon this subject a little more as I was out and about today. So, in America, we value space, I think, more than anywhere else, especially when you get outside of New York and sort of really urban areas in California and outside of Philly. Philly's a very urban kind of place. Same thing with Baltimore and Washington to an extent, and Chicago. Although you can get some space in Chicago for not quite as much money as it would cost you in other places. Yeah, we love our space here. And it was just I'll get to this more, but it was just very telling when I talk to people from other places just how much more space you can get for the money in large, especially here where I live, since I know no surprise, I live in Kentucky, and actually you could even get. I thought the home prices were actually a little bit cheaper even in Indiana from Kentucky. So, there's just it's just interesting. It's interesting stuff. But so when I think about it from a middle American perspective, somebody who was born in Wisconsin, lived in North Carolina for a bit, and then lived in Kentucky for a lot, and then moved to Indiana, and then back to Kentucky. What I really find desirable, I think, is sort of different than most of the rest of my listeners and probably the rest of the world, because Middle America is just it's like was trying to explain, like I always try to explain. It's just a large amount of middle class. There's just so much middle-sized cities and middle-class people. You can just set up shop anywhere in towns of 50 to 100,000 and just expect a certain amount of stuff to be there. And that was also partially in my episode on what makes a city of 100,000. So anyway, when we were looking for this particular house that we bought, uh, the main things we desired, well, first off, we desired enough bedrooms to accommodate us and one child, and then we're having another child. Uh, you know, that is something that a lot of Americans now see as a given, that you have enough bedrooms for all of your children. Now, sometimes that doesn't happen as easily, and when it's so funny because when my dad was a kid, it was a little bit different too. When he grew up in Wisconsin in the fifth, or well, his parents built their house in the 50s. And there wasn't quite as much space. Granted, they did try and kind of convert the house, different spaces in the house, where they ended up actually having almost enough space for everyone to have their own room. And that's just, that is common in other places. Don't get me wrong. I think people in Australia do get that sometimes, and in Canada. But man, in Britain, it's just not common. Like even my daughter watches this show, and there's other parts of the UK where it's probably more common, like more stretches of Scotland and Ireland, and even parts of Wales. But I mean, we watched this show. My daughter likes that Peppa Pig show, and in the premise there, the Pepper and George share a room, and I've heard actually it's you might want to raise your kids to share a room so you're not spending as much when you're going out places for hotels and things, which we may experiment with that. We'll see how far it goes, but it's just a given, right? It's like you. I was an only child, so and we always had 3 bedroom houses. My family's always able to afford at least a 3 bedroom house. So I was always used to growing up with my dad having an office room where there being an extra room for guests. I mean, that's just how much space we're talking about is a given. When you're an American, that's what you expect out of a house. You expect if you have a decent job, and actually we're living off of one income, surprisingly enough, but most people live off of two. But you expect if you make a decent average amount of money that you should be able to have that, and that's just what we expect in America. you know and another thing we wanted, of course, was a fenced in yard, and we got that with this house. And you know again, we expect to have enough space to have a fenced in yard for a dog. Like, that's America for you. You got to have enough for your kids, you got to have a yard to stick them in, and you got to have a place for a dog, right? And I just don't think that's a we got a quarter acre lot. And some people, that's a it was just very telling because I posted a picture in this group that I'm in that's mainly British people, and they're just like, "Oh, that looks like so much space." It's cracking me up. I'm like, because to me, my house is actually very small. Not to say that I don't, I like it. It's plenty of space for me and my wife, but my house is not there. There are many houses that are bigger than my house. Even go down the street here, I can walk down the street and they're bigger houses than my house. It's crazy. It's just so crazy to me because I even take this for granted. Like, I think about, well, what if I because right now I'm in my den, which has an extra bathroom, and it's a den space that we may use for guests if they come over or other things. But I mean, I think about, man, what if I had another bedroom, or what if I added on this or that? I'm already thinking about what I could do to have more space, and I have this and a 2-car garage. That was another thing that was important to me. I wanted to actually have a decent garage because I tell you, I and this may just be me, but I get so annoyed with having a fogged up car in the morning, or, I like having a space, just a space to stick my cars. I feel like they're more protected, and then I got in my garage, I got shelves I can store things in, and that was just very important to me. And we got all that. We got all that within a reasonable amount of money that we could afford with our income. And I don't know, that's just to me what an American house hunt looks like, you know. And then the other thing that was very important was school district, because actually I could have got possibly a nicer house in a crappier school district. So, and with a daughter, that's just very important. And I think that's probably something that's universally important, but I think it's stressed a lot in American culture as well. Oh, we gotta get our kids into the best schools. They gotta be near the best schools. You know, even if they're not even in public schools. Sometimes they're in private schools, but people want to be next to the private school. That's the right school. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So, um, and then of course we bought our house built in the '90s. A lot of Americans just they're always looking for a new house. Granted, it's getting more popular to buy older houses and renovate them again. It was with my generation, and that actually was born out of necessity because a lot of people my age can't afford a new house. But I, in when Canadian house hunters or whatever, or I see shows based in Britain, people just don't buy new houses often. New houses just start, and that's just, again, comes down to limited space. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what surprised me about talking to people about Canadian house shopping culture, because it was a little bit different than what I expected. Now, granted, everyone I know from Canada are urbanites mainly, so I don't really know a lot of suburban people from Canada. If there are suburban people from Canada I haven't spoken with yet that would like to chime in and correct me on some of my preconceived notions, please feel free to. But anyway, so in America, we largely have to have space for our cars, our pets, and our kids, and we have to. It's a necessity. You can't build a house smaller than that anymore and get away with it. And older houses are constantly being renovated accommodate those things. And that's the American way. That's the American dream. That's how it's always been. That's how it's especially ramped up to be 50s onward. And I don't really see it changing all that much. Although, there has been some changes with my generation. We've been a little slower to buy houses. Some of us have been doing the thing where we get a huge plot of land and then buy a tiny house and just live off that. Uh, I we're still gonna always be that kind of culture. We love having our space because to us, owning a home means some. To me, it means having space. There's a certain amount of space that we expect to have when we say, "I own a house. This is my space. This is my territory." And I think in a lot of ways, other cultures live a little bit more transient you know, which is funny because in America you can be actually more mobile if you wanted to, but yet we really like having our space. It's kind of funny actually. So, yeah. When we talk, when I the interesting thing I've heard from my Canadian friends that they've found really important to them, and this is just crazy to me. They're really obsessed with having lots of urban culture going on around them. Whereas you see in America, it's not that I don't like having some urban things around, but to me, it's not a big deal to drive 40 minutes to go do something more urban, which I can because I live about 40 minutes outside a bigger city that has, a lot more things than my cities do. Although I don't really find my county to be lacking much because we have plenty of stores and we have movie theaters and things. But it's just not as urban enough for these people that I talk to all the time, right? And I have friends like this in college too. Don't get me wrong. This is partially a younger people thing, but one of the people I know is also an older person and likes it. You know, I had a friend from Eastern Kentucky who said, "Oh, I gotta move to New York City. I can't stand it anymore. I need to be somewhere more urban." Didn't think where we went to college in Lexington was all urban enough for him. And now that he's been there for 10 years or however long since we've been out, because he works for Goldman Sachs, he almost hates it now. He's finally getting sick of it, right? Because in America, we eventually we have this history of just getting sick of the city. Sick of you know and I'm not just talking about the crime. I do understand that American cities, generally speaking, have more crime in their urban core and things than most other countries in the West. But it's not even that. We just get sick of being stacked on top of people. Uh, some of us are willing to sacrifice the services just to have more space of our own. You know, it's really interesting to me. Like I was talking to this one person, she said it was important to her to be near jazz clubs, right? And to me, that's just not important to me. I could care less as long as my daughter's in a good enough school and I have a place to park my cars and I'm not spending an arm and a leg for anything. I to me having cheaper milk and cheaper gas and you know, being able to drive on the open highway or only drive 5 minutes to my work and deal with virtually no traffic on the way, that's all more important to me than whether or not I'm close to a jazz club. And it's just a different mindset. I do think, you know, like I watch these shows, it's Property Brothers or whatever it is, that's based out of Canada. And you'd see these people like they would buy absolute dumps just to be right around the corner from these neighborhoods. It was just that important. And don't get me wrong, people do that a lot in Chicago. But like it's like in Chicago, people still the suburbs are still growing in Chicago. It's not like people do that all the time in the urban core in Chicago. It's crazy. It's just very, very this weird obsession to me. And I think that's because there's a limited amount of land where people can live because rural Canada, I don't know, it just doesn't seem like Canada has quite as much of a middle city culture. You're either a city or you're not in Canada. There's not as much in between. Maybe I'm wrong. I would love for somebody to write in the comments section and correct my preconceived notion. So then there was Britain. And Britain, they don't even have yes, there are single family homes that are detached in Britain in places, I'm sure. but they just don't. They just seem to be a more on top of each other kind of people. Used to just walking everywhere. Now everyone has car, living in the village. I every show it's very rare I see a show out of Britain somewhere that isn't. You're right on top of your neighbors. You mostly I was reading like I said, I posted in this thread of British people about how I was really excited about having my rear facing garage, and they were like, well, how 3/4 were like, what's a garage? No, not they weren't like, what's a garage? We're like, yeah, man, I don't have one. Or they're like, oh, I have to park around the corner and walk up to my door and all this other crazy stuff that I just that would be unacceptable to most Americans. I feel like most people buying a house, it'd just be totally unacceptable to have to deal with those kind of things. And that's why I love it here. That's one thing I'm not sure I could get used to living in another country. Like, I'd like to think, and this is what's crazy. I'm going to turn 30 this year. I'm not some old person, okay? I'm not some person who grew up in the 70s or the 50s or something and thinks I need it this way, but I still, like, I watch these shows and I see all that tiny square feet. I'm like, I don't know if I could deal with that just to be a part of culture or whatever. It would be a huge negative for me to have to like I've lived in apartments. In fact, my last before we bought this house, we lived in a third floor apartment, and we had a neighbor next to us and below us, and still I don't know. I couldn't. To me, it wouldn't be owning a house if I did that. Like, you do that when you rent around here, but when you buy a house, when you say you're owning something, it's just weird to think of owning something and then having to deal with those kinds of things. So, that's sort of the differences I noticed. And in Britain, in particular, room is they're downstairs and their house is worth twice as much as mine, almost no, 3 times as much, because of the exchange rate. And it's just like, oh my god, that's insane. Give me some room. I want to be able to breathe. Like it's just not for me. What I really love about our house we just bought a couple months ago is just right now I'm recording in my den. Just having a den, an extra space to go to get away every once in a while. And when obviously with my parents, their house had 3 bedrooms, but it also had 2 living rooms in it. So you could get away to another living room, and a 2-car garage. So, there's just all this stuff. And then their house is actually point 0.6. It's over half an acre. So they got a lot of space in the back. Just we like to stretch out, man. We like to stretch out. So anyway, let me know what you all think in the comments section. Tell me some other things that are desirable in the house. I really love our house and I love our location because not only are we in this good school district, we're close to my work, but it's also easy to hit major highways from here and drive on open road. And there's lots of stuff around. Most restaurants and stores that I go to are within a 20-minute drive, and I love it. Yeah, that's what I like. Location, location, location. Anyway, let me know what you all think. Thanks for listening. Peace.